everyone to our CPE webinar on how the CFO, CIO, and CISO can partner to reduce cybersecurity risk. My name is Kay Steelman. I'm the VP of Professional Services of the Accounting, Finance, HR, Legal, and Administrative brands of BGSF and the administrator of our CPE program. So for today, we just have a few reminders for our session. For those of you who need to earn CPE, you will need to attend the entire 50 minutes and answer 3 of the 4 polling questions that will come up randomly during the presentation. And even if you don't need CPE today, we really do invite you to still answer the polling questions because we really appreciate your insight. And I think we can all benefit from seeing the results of each poll. You can only respond to the polling questions if you are logged in through the desktop app or a mobile app. So just a reminder there. And then within 1 week after you complete the evaluation form, we will send you the CPE certificate. If you have any questions, please enter them directly in the chat section to the side. And please just set your chat to go to all panelists and attendees. And so we will compile these and answer them towards the end of the presentation. Maybe a few during, but probably more towards the end. Now, just a little bit about BGSF. We are one of the fastest growing publicly traded workforce solutions firms in the United States. And the company was created in 2007, formerly BG Staffing Inc. And now we operate through 91 locations across 46 states, DC, and now in Canada. So within our professional division, BGSF has 10 specialized brands, and those are specifically in accounting, finance, HR, legal and administrative, information technology, and cybersecurity. So we connect the right talent to the right opportunities, whether your organization needs project consulting, managed services, staff augmentation, direct hire, or executive search services. So now a little bit about our speaker. Today, we are thrilled to have our own Lee J. Kushner. Lee has been exclusively providing recruitment services to the information security industry and its profession for the past 25 years. As the founder of L.J. Kushner and Associates, Lee and his team of experienced information security professionals have been called upon to successfully solve some of the industry's most complex recruitment challenges. So throughout his career, he's provided recruitment services and consultative guidance to many, I think over 500 unique entities as they attempt to protect and enable their businesses. He has supported information security initiatives in both the largest enterprises and some of the most innovative startups. So throughout the past 2 decades, Lee has been an invited speaker at major events on the topics of hiring and retention, organizational design, compensation, and professional development. But in 2019, his firm L.J. Kushner and Associates was acquired by BGSF, where he is now the executive managing director responsible for the cybersecurity business unit. So now I will turn it over to Lee to begin the program. And thanks, Lee.
Well, thank you, Kay. I'll tell you, it's very nice to be here, and it's very nice to be able to have a presentation that has an audience of both, security professionals and other groups and other functions that work with information security professionals. I see the polling question is up on my screen. Brittany, did we incorporate that now? Or is that, is the polling question up now, or are we going to wait?
I'm going to launch it now. So when the question pops up on your screen, please answer it. You have a minute to answer it. So okay. I'm going to launch it now.
Okay, I apologize. I have a little bit of it. There we go. Okay, super. So yeah, we have these polling questions. I generally try to create some polling questions that would really correlate to the subject matter, and ones that would make you think about your own organization, how your organization views security, and where security kind of fits, maybe the maturity of your organization. But so I guess if I could, I'm going to let you guys finish the finish the question and then we roll, Brittany? Is that how it goes?
Yep, so you can start your presentation, but we are going to, once the poll closes, then everyone will be able to see the answers. So it'll close in about 10 seconds.
Okay, this is new to me. I appreciate everybody's patience. All right, cool. So look, the thing that I really enjoyed about this topic is the fact that I talk to CISOs all day long, and I think that CISOs are, because they're one of the newest executives to the overall suite, the overall C-suite, that CISOs, the role of the CISO is not yet fully kind of baked, and it's not really fully understood. And I think that a lot of people view the Chief Information Security Officer as, let's say, the office of no, whereas the CISO is essentially, from a CISO's perspective, they're trying to enable the business. And I think that you really have to think about, what the CISO does and how the CISO evolves, right? And I think to go ahead and do that, one of the things that you really need to do is to understand the ethos of the CISO, like why people become CISOs, why security is not something that they've manufactured, why security is a calling to them, while it's something that's ingrained in their DNA. And I think that by being involved in the profession for such a long time, I think that it's one of those things where when you truly understand the person in this role or the people who sit in this role, you have a much better way of interacting with them, about making your relationship more productive, and to truly build partnerships that are actually, good. So if I think about the job description of the CISO, I could give you a textbook job description, but in general, the CISO is there to secure the business. The CISO is there to protect the business and make sure that business functions stay the way that they are charged and operating. Brittany, could you flip sides? So in a nutshell, and this is a very small list, but the security leader's responsibility is to really own the security program. They're responsible for selecting necessary controls. They're responsible for protecting companies from internal and external threats. They own the creation of policies and procedures. But the CISO role is really multifaceted. If you think about most CISO organizational charts, they'll include functions like engineering, they'll include functions like security operations, they'll include functions like security architecture, which focuses on the design and implementation of the design of all security functionality. They'll have policies and procedures, they'll have governance, they might have risk, they might have all things that intertwine with security. So you have security as this blend of technology, a blend of policy, a blend of risk, and you really have this true, what I consider to be like a center point where all these organizational functions kind of fuse together. And what the CISO is really trying to do is really to create an ecosystem of trust. And when you think about trust, right, and you think about where people are in the organization, you think about not just the organization itself, but you think about the extended organization. So first, when it comes down to employees, right, we need to protect our employees' data. We need to protect all their personal information. We need to be able to make sure that they can't be compromised because of where they work or who they are. We think about our customers. Our customers, like when you're working with a customer, what you're doing is you're essentially, that customer is trusting you. I don't know how many people have been a victim of a data breach or victim of some sort of attack, a phishing attack or anything like that, because they were a maybe they shopped at Home Depot, maybe they shopped at Target, maybe they had a Sony PlayStation account. And I'm not picking on those people, but whenever that happens, like to this day, I still, when I go to Target, I pay in cash, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, but that's just what I do when I walk into Target. Um, Partners, right? You start thinking about all the partners that you work with, all the people who become extensions of who you are, all the people that you open up your systems to as far as sharing, whether those are cloud service providers, whether they're contractors, whether they're consultative firms, whether they're other technology providers. And if you think about the attacks that are happening right now, another kind of heads up from Microsoft the other day with a third party kind of attack. And a lot of people are getting breached more from their third parties versus what they're doing on their own. So the CISO is really trying to build that trust, right? And then, of course, the shareholders. You thinking about, when you're deciding to make investments in companies, where when companies are deciding to recommend the purchase of a company, they want to work with trusted people. They want people whose businesses are secure. They want to make sure that whatever they're doing, that their world is not turned upside down because of some sort of security incident or some sort of blind spot. So the CISO is really trying to build this full ecosystem of trust, right? And in order to do that, like, you have to think about who the CISO really needs to work with. And the answer to that question is they need to work well with everybody. And it's one of the things that makes finding the right chief information security officer so very difficult. Because the wrong CISO is going to create a constant state of internal friction within a company. And then there's always going to be problems that will exist because people are not functioning on the same page. And the right CISO will create an environment of transparency and an environment of trust. And you think about the people the CISO needs to work with, right? And you can think about why the office of the CISO means different things, right? To a technologist, to a CIO or a CTO, the CISO is probably somebody who has to bless how things are built, how things are rolled out, what technology is purchased, how technology is implemented. For legal and privacy, you're really talking about how data is secure and how data is utilized, whether that's customer data or any other internal data. Finance, you're thinking about, the ultimate side of the world where how could the business impact be affected by a security incident or a breach? Internal audit, do we have our shop in order? Risk, any of the business owners, right? Risk, what risks are we willing to take on? What is our level of risk tolerance? All the business owners that exist out there. It's great to have a lot of these wonderful ideas about how business is conducted, how new products are rolled out. However, security has to be factored into that consideration. And then, of course, you have human resources where you're really dealing with what happens when somebody does something bad. What is the impact of malicious email? What is the impact of bad internal communication? How does this work with what happens if we have a bad internal actor? So you have all these different areas. And like really what happens is that because information security means so many different things to different people, and people have so many different views on the role, what happens is that there's a lot of miscommunication as to what makes a CISO good, what makes a CISO effective, how those relationships work together, and where those partnerships really will pay off. And I'm hoping that during this conversation, that I give you all some ideas about how to better work with the CISO and how to understand a bit more of their perspective. So I think we have another polling question. Oh, so as you can see, security touches all aspects of the business. So that means that, a partnership with the CISO and a partnership with security and accepting the value of security is really everybody's job. And it's really the CISO's, I would say that their mandate, but is to make sure that people can be included in these conversations and that the security leader can become flexible and empathetic to all these different perspectives and pulling it together for the good of the company. I think we have another question. So here it comes. This one should be pretty easy, but I'm curious to see how many organizations actually have a chief information security officer, or if they have somebody who is a leader of a security function. Is that person a chief information security officer? If that person is not a chief information security officer, I would ask you to say no.
So we have about 20 seconds left on the poll.
Okay, super. So here we are, right? About 30% have CISOs, 60% don't have CISOs, and I could understand why people wouldn't really know. So let's talk about who the Chief Information Security Officer is, and really, like, what is the genesis of what makes people decide to go into the field of information security? And by doing this for so many years, one of the things that I've seen time and time again, if I talk to people who are really in this world, there really are purists. I think that if I would tell you, most information security people don't go into the profession because they say, I think I can make a lot of money and security is, a hot field, so I can do that. I think truly the best information security officers and, really a lot of the ones that have matriculated up are people who feel a calling to do good. They have a calling to do right. Um, their their backdrop or their foundation is one of benevolence. It's one where they're looking to sniff out what's wrong. They're looking to call out people who are not doing the things that they're supposed to do. They take a lot of pleasure in the protection of others and being counted on to provide that protection. Um, and I think that, when it comes down to the types of people who become chief information security officers, there's so many times I'll see people who were Eagle Scouts, people who were in public service, people who've had military careers, people who were quote unquote, and I would say this in a good way, were hackers when they were young. And when I say hackers, I don't mean it like in a bad sense that they were trying to break things, that they were trying to figure out how things work. They're really looking to make sure that things are done right and for the overall good. And I think that when you start thinking about the genesis of who these folks are, you can really start understanding how to relate to them. Whenever you work in any profession, but when you work in the world of recruitment that I do, you kind of understand by who the people are, the kinds of organizations that really resonate with them. And I think that when you're working with a chief information security officer and you're in an organization, you probably should understand that there's a reason why the Chief Information Security Officer has decided to spend their time in this organization where they could have chosen others. So there's probably a sense of either a tying to the mission of the organization, a tying to the purpose, a tying to the culture, or something that they know that, you know, they're at a place where the things that they're protecting are actually meaningful and valuable to them. So if you think about CISOs, a lot of CISOs, they like to refer to themselves as superheroes, which, I mean, in some cases they might be. Whenever I think about a superhero, what I try to do is I try to think of their origin story. And I think that if you know where people come from, you have a better understanding of how to communicate with them. In the old days, before CISOs and security leaders became mainstream professions, what they normally did was just take a technician and say, "Hey, you become the head of security," and people are like, "Okay, let me do that." But the profession has been evolving, and it evolves in a couple different ways because different organizations have different currency. Um, Companies that are super technical, their chief information security officers come with a very strong technical pedigree. A lot of times those folks have computer science backgrounds. They've worked their way up through an engineering or architectural career path to get to where they're at when they come into leadership. And those people are ones that will always value or look at the problem from a technical lens. And it's the lens that's most comfortable to them. Now, there are other folks that come into security from more of a policy, a compliance, a risk-based angle. Those people are very easy to relate to tying things to quote unquote the business. They're very much understanding how they come with an understanding of maybe how business operates and the kinds of risks or rules or regulations or policies that need to be followed so the business can be in compliance. However, a lot of times the folks that come from either technical backgrounds, sometimes they struggle to really grasp the risk side. And some of the folks with the risk side, they really, really struggle to grasp some of the technical issues. So you have those two characteristics, and then you have what I consider to be other. Now, when I say other, what you've seen recently is that because security is such a culture carrying role, and because organizations have realized that in order to create an environment of a culture of security, you might take people from other backgrounds and make them the heads of information security or the chief information security officers. So a lot of times these are people that are coming from other angles of the business, and they're able to go out and then really promote the business itself and hold the business first. But then many of them will have those blind spots. They'll really focus on the business. So you have to think about, where does your CISO come from? And that's a good way of understanding maybe where some of their baselines are, right? After that, right, so you understand who they are. You really need to understand what drives them, right? And we've talked about the fact that um, they come from backgrounds of strong integrity. They come from backgrounds where they care about the difference between right or wrong. And like, when you start thinking about those things, right, you start thinking about what the CISOs do. If one of their prime motivations, right, I put that in like very two core categories, right? So you have the category of protecting the business, right? And when you start thinking about protecting the business, this is when the CISO is thinking about all the things that can go wrong. And you start thinking about all the things that would probably, I would say, keep them up at night, thinking about the bad people, thinking about what am I not doing that I should be doing? What have I missed? What have I not done correctly? How can I make sure that my house is impenetrable, right? So that is a core motivation, right? And that's part of it, right? You have a little bit of Like, and if a security leader is just focused on that, they will generally fail, right? And they'll fail because what they're not thinking about is how they enable the business. And enabling the business is really the separation of what I consider to be one level of CISO and then what I consider to be this next generation of CISO that is coming up and is really taking hold and really desirable. These CISOs out there, when they're talking about enabling the business, they become much better versed in having conversations about how to make security transparent, how to ease the end user experience, how to put up less gates but keep the most control. How do you, I would say, balance innovation and control in a way that keeps the store open, that makes people say, we can do this, we're willing to accept this level of risk. So they're really putting this thing together where, you know, they're enabling the business. And I think that if you are in any of these other functions, you could make a determination very quickly if your CISO is a protect the business at all costs or enable the business. If you could make that delineation, that becomes a really good foothold for a discussion. And if you have somebody that is enabling the business as a main motivation with a sense of risk control and risk mitigation, you could probably have any conversation because that becomes an overarching principle that you guys are there for, right? If you have somebody who's protecting the business at all costs, that's great, but you're probably going to see a lot of blind spots where those things don't necessarily work. So if you think about these things, like at the end of the day, the CISO is the profession in the business that when everything goes well, nobody knows that they exist. But when things go poorly, everybody knows who they are, their name is up in lights, and all the arrows and all the fingers are pointing to them. So you have to really think about what keeps a CISO up at night and what makes them kind of think about, you know, the things that they can't control. So how do I blend these things that keep a CISO up at night that will really lead to their drive of protecting the business? But how do I think about this in an enabling functionality? Where do we find these common grounds of enabling the business and protecting the business? And how do we start framing conversations in terms that they can get behind? Because at the end of the day, the number one motivation that CISOs have is becoming a former CISO. And when you think about what happens is that when things go bad, when somebody is blamed, it is not necessarily what is happening. You know, the CISO doesn't want to tell the business no, but if it's telling the business yes at the risk of self-preservation, self-preservation becomes the greatest drive. So the CISO will start asking for exceptions and people signing off on exceptions to make sure that they're, you know, that they've covered themselves, right? So when you think about why a CISO might be taking a hard line on certain things, they're taking a hard line, number one, because of their charter, because of their mandate, because of their job description to protect the business. But at the same point in time, whether they are the person to blame or not, becoming a former CISO is something, or when a breach happens, that is something that stays with that CISO from company to company. And people are always going to be asked, what could you have done to prevent it? How did you let this happen? Why did this happen on your watch? So a CISO is always thinking about that in the back of their mind. And it's one of the bigger things that really calls into question on how CISOs are positioned in an organization. Because if a CISO is positioned in a role where they are subservient or they're subordinate, subservient's a bad word, but subordinate to technical functions, a lot of times CISOs will lose those kinds of battles. But if things go wrong, the CISO will be the one that will be blamed, and the CIO or the CTO might get a pass. So you really have to think about, how am I viewing the CISO? Am I viewing the CISO as a peer equivalent, or am I looking at the CISO as somebody that I can direct based upon what I think is right versus about what we think is right? So I think we have another polling question. I'd like everybody to think about this question when they're reading it, just to kind of think about what's changed since the pandemic, what's changed since a more remote work environment. How has your company responded to security? I'm very interested to see to what degree things have increased, decreased, or remained the same.
Okay, about 20 seconds left.
Interesting. Well, it's nice to know that nobody's organization has decreased or significantly decreased. So I think that's a trend that bodes well for all the security pros that are on this call. But I do think that what's happening is that security is becoming much more of a mainstream and much more of an elevated issue, right? So the thing that we have to think about as non-security folks is, like, how do you build trust with the CISO? How is it that you're able to create this environment where you and the CISO can work together? And I think that one of the things that I would encourage everybody to do, especially when they get a new CISO or new CISOs there, is to really, I would I would say, connect with them on a personal level, but I think that it's very important for the CISO to truly understand the mandate of your role, the mandate of what you're responsible for, and the mandate that you have, and like, what are your prime motivations? So I think that when you start understanding the number one thing that pulls somebody to something, the prime motivation, I think that you're able to get to a point where you really understand the who behind the role. And when you understand the who, I think it makes a lot of conversations easy. I think that there's a lot of times what happens is that when a company starts making stronger commitments to security, people automatically start thinking about what they can't do, versus on how can we do this more securely. And I think that if people look at the chief information security officer as a true enabler of business, versus the protector, I think that if you're able to kind of create that kind of relationship, um, that's something that goes a long way. And I think it really starts with some sort of personal interaction. So if you have an organization, if you do not know your CISO, if you have a new CISO, or if you're involved in a CISO search process, my advice would be to try to get to know that person before you have something of relevance that you have to collaborate on. But let's say that that's passed and now you have to collaborate on that person, right? You have to collaborate with the CISO. You have to work in that partnership. And I think that, when you really start thinking about it, um, there is a lot to say about being able to work with somebody from the beginning and bringing somebody in at the early stages of a program versus bringing somebody in after the fact. I think that one of the worst things that has to happen in any corporate decision making is that a person whose opinion matters is brushed off as a secondary or a tertiary checkbox, and that a bulk of the work is done up front before that person is involved. I think when you do that, that creates this element of mistrust. It creates a lack of transparency, make people think that they're hiding, right? So if you think about what you need to do when you have a new idea or you're about to start rolling on something new, whether it's technology, whether it's legal, whether it's a new customer, whether it's a new offering, I would encourage you to engage the CISO and their team in the design phase to really get their thoughts about what do you think are some of the blind spots? What have you seen before that doesn't work well here? What are the things that I have to look out for? How can you help me build the right mousetrap so that we can do this right the first time? That we're not doing all the work and then I have to say you have to undo it because I'm the CISO. Because if you do that, you're going to start creating friction. How did I do all this work? Why did I waste all my time? Well, you wasted all your time because instead of going out and proactively engaging somebody whose opinion that's going to matter, you decided to push it to the side as if they weren't there. So I think that CISOs really appreciate that ability to be pulled in early so that they are a part of it, right? And they're not going to look to take the credit, but they're going to look to make it so that you can actually do the work that you want to do, right? And then if you think about it, right, ultimately, when you're building these relationships with the CISO, what you should start doing is start creating a framework for decision making. And when I talk about a framework for decision making, I think that if you're able to build a machine for decision making, and maybe this is something that the CISO can do on their own and push out to their team or work closely with the other executives, but to think about the framing of why decisions are made. So the concept of maybe building the machine versus creating a new machine every time. And if you start understanding these universal shared goals that you have, risks that you're willing to accept versus not willing to accept, right? Um, and what happens when you don't agree? So, you know, a good CISO is going to create what we would call good friction, and it's not going to be constant friction, but good friction. They're going to encourage people to think about how to build things securely, how to roll these things out securely, how to make these things better, right? So when you start thinking about this, you should start understanding that, in essence, um, you have to be able to not just deal with an executive one-on-one or with one of these functions one-on-one. You should start thinking about is how do we build a working group where I can get an understanding of how other people view the problem and how other people view possible decisions. But it all starts with that decision making, right? And if you could enlist the help of other leaders in your company, what happens is this is that security becomes a more friendly topic to discuss. It becomes something where people are thinking about it with this overarching goal on how do we make the business more secure, but how do we keep the business more productive? So when you start looping in more people and you get more thoughts or more opinions or more perspectives than the one-on-one conflict might be, what happens is that people come together. And one of the things I've seen is I've seen companies build security steering committees. And when you have the right sponsorship on that, it becomes like this one forum to talk about either the risks that exist out there or things that people are seeing in the market on a regular basis and how those risks relate to our business. So I would encourage anybody who's going to be touching security to proactively volunteer, right? And when I say that is that, you know, every time that you're kind of in conflict or that you're there, if it's part of a regular discussion, you automatically lessen the stakes. You've automatically taken the stakes and kind of let's say, you've made them less explosive, right? So when you bring in more people and it becomes part of the regular flow, you don't have a situation where people are combative. You don't have an I win, you lose kind of environment, right? So when we start thinking about how do these folks operate, how do both, and this is an onus on the CISO as well. The CISO needs to be able to think about where the other people are coming from. And if it comes down to a situation, right, where there are two completely different views of opinion and people can agree on acceptable risks, then I think that it's very important that you have a one level up sponsorship. It could be another senior executive. It could be a board member, depending on how the organization is structured. But you should have one person that you can both go to as kind of an assigned mediator to say, like, look, this opinion rules the room and we'll work to that opinion. So that's another good way for you to gain more exposure to executive management and gain more exposure. Now, you can't be doing it every time, but when the situation calls for it, I definitely think that that's important. And look, you know, one of the best thing, like, people have so many bad conceptions about security and about what security does. I think that the one thing that all CISOs can use, and I joke with Brittany on my team about it, is that, you know, the CISO really needs, they need more good PR. They need more people to say, it was great that we let the CISO involved in this process. It was great that, you know, we incorporated their opinion early on. And the more that every time, if you're a leader at another function, that you can have a good interaction with the CISO, I think it's very important that you share that success with your coworkers, you share that success with your team, and you share that success with your reporting chain to show that security was part of a win. That the more public press that you get and goodwill that's created by the value that a CISO creates in helping things work, the better off it is. And I think that goes in verse 2, that for the CISO, right? The CISO needs to be able to tell their security team, hey, they're great partners over there, and we could work very closely with them, and encourage this kind of interaction if you're the CISO at the lower levels of your organization, for the risk team to talk to the risk team, for the engineering team to talk to the engineering team, for ops to talk to ops. So for all these worlds to kind of come together, if you start building this goodwill and this we kind of attitude internally, which sounds a little bit hokey, but security is something that has to be proved to be valuable, not only when it can only be proved to be invaluable, because that is the world that the CISO is living in. They're always there with a bullseye on their back when bad things happen. So when there's something that is good, you have to be the one to say, you know what? We did this, we got the agreement, we closed the business, we created a great policy, we launched this wonderful product because the CISO helped us from the onset. And now here's the last poll question. I would envision that the CISOs on this call are going to say that they either agree or strongly agree with this. And I would envision that other people who are not in those functions might either be neither disagree or strongly disagree. I'm very curious to see, we don't have a way of linking responses with the respondent, but I would be very interesting if there was able to get that second set of data.
Okay, 20 seconds left.
Well, that's interesting. Well, I think it's great that so many people think that, they feel that their company is well protected against a cyber attack. That either means that they feel very comfortable about the company's commitment to security, or that, they're very comfortable about the controls that they've put in place. I would tell you that, having this, having the ability to understand how people feel about protection. I know CISOs that have wonderful organizations, and they'll never feel that they are strongly prepared for a cyber attack because they're always thinking about what might be coming down the pipe, or they always thinking about the resources that some of these other groups have versus the resources that they have to protect. So it is kind of interesting. But look, we're going to close the presentation. I have a couple more slides left. But just to kind of wrap this up, and I'm open to questions. I see that there's some in the chat, but you know, I think that I'd encourage anybody to ask any questions that they have. But look, I think that when you start thinking about this, right, and I think this is something you could take from anything, but I think it really relates to a CISO. Like, one of the things that people they just sometimes don't understand, like security, and security professionals are guilty of this on the other side because they're always saying, but it's different with security, right? So you have a group of people who might not have taken the time to really understand maybe why this group is different, or why their positions go unfilled, or why it's so hard to find the right mindset, or like what is the right security mindset, right? I think it's good for everybody to try to understand what makes that person tick. Like if you were talking to a salesperson, you would clearly know that what a salesperson is like, I want to sell good products and I want to make commissions. Like that's a very clear motivation of a salesperson. But security folks might have different reasons for being at different places. And I think that, you have to find some commonalities in your motivation and why the CISO is motivated and where that is. And I think in all cases, when you can and when it's earned by the CISO, is to be an advocate for security. Like I know organizations have all these security, whether they're phishing tests, whether security awareness video. I mean, people are the weakest link in security. But if you do not make security important to your teams, right, you're basically telling the CISO that what they're doing doesn't matter. And I think that that is a bad way to start any strong relationship. So when anything comes out from the security team that you find is reasonable, right? Or even if you ask the CISO, hey, why are we doing this? If you could then become that advocate and say, well, this is why we're doing this. This is how this helps you. This is how this helps our company. This is how this gives you more job security. If you can do this and do this well, we're a better place. I think it's the opportunity to advocate for security and to be that advocate when things go well versus when things go bump in the night. That becomes super important. And I would give you a lot of, you know, um, I think that would be, something that you should do, right? I think you have to find those opportunities. Um, and, as far as, the environment of trust, right? Like, so that trust really starts at the personal level. And that trust really starts amongst, individuals. I think that when you create that environment of inclusion, and I say inclusion like respecting the fact that security is important. Everybody likes to know that their position is respected. And I think that, one of my, you know, uh, mentors in a younger life always told me that, in order to kind of, you earn respect, but like to get respect, you give respect. And I think that when you have an organization and you have a chief information security officer there, where somebody has said that the office of the CISO is an important function to our company, I think that you have to go out there and give that position the respect initially, and then make the CISO earn additional respect. And I think in that respect are earned by partnership. It's earned by listening. It's earned by actually working together to build something better than you would on your own. Thinking about how you can take what you've done and then broadcast it and say, this is a great example of how we did something fully innovative, but we did it responsibly. And I think that's a business discussion that everybody can relate to and appreciate. Um, so I see we have like a question or two. First, I appreciate, you know, I appreciate everybody's time by participating, and I know everybody's day is quite busy. Um, you know, yeah, I mean, it's Brittany, you could flip the slide. You know, one of the question, you know, I appreciate everybody listening. I know everybody's busy. I know that this is, you know, this is beneficial, but at the same time, I know that you guys are sacrificing other things. So hopefully, I've made your time valuable. One of the questions that we have is like, what are the greatest cyber threats to organizations in 2021? I mean, 2021, I guess, is gone now. I guess 2022. I think that I'm not as well versed to answer that question as maybe some of the CISOs that are on this call are. But I do think a general statement is that, you know, we're not seeing cybercrime dissipate. We're not seeing it become less prevalent in business, in the news. I think that when President Biden brought all these leaders of these companies and they announced all these, like, you know, significant investments in cybersecurity, I think that, you know, shows that these large companies are committing. I think that the real big issue, though, is like, what happens to companies that don't have the resources, or they can't find the tools necessary either to hire the right people, to hire, you know, build the right, invest in the right tools, to kind of see the problem in a good way. And I think that the thing I've always learned from talking to, you know, people on the other side of the security community is that, you know, every time that there's a 10-foot high wall, there's going to be somebody out there with an 11-foot high ladder. And I think that, you know, when you think about when you see these ransomware attacks, right, what these people are doing, they're not going out and attacking Google or attacking Amazon or attacking Microsoft. Like, they might be piggybacking through Microsoft, but they're not attacking those core organizations. You know, what they're doing is they're attacking the lowest hanging fruit. They're attacking state and local governments. They're attacking pipelines. They're attacking legacy industries. When they start attacking those places, a lot of those organizations, their investment in security in terms of people, in terms of culture, in terms of environment, is not even close to how some of these leading technology companies or financial companies have viewed security for quite some time. So I think it's not necessarily what the attack is. I think that the attackers are getting more bold, and especially in a world where you might have, you know, more ease of ransomware payments, and you know, with cryptocurrency, and you know, not to blame it all on crypto, but you have these, you know, you've just created a playing field that is more accessible to a lot more bad actors, and there are a lot of bad actors that are well paid to be bad actors. The value of information is only increasing. The value of competitive information is only increasing. And, you know, I think that if you're a security professional and you have a good reputation, you have a very bright future ahead of you, because I don't think that people are going to stop needing you for quite some time. I do think that in general that we need to have more computer scientists. We need to have more people involved in our educational programs, so that they become more adept. I say this all the time, we need more video game builders than video game players. But I do think that, you know, the more aware people are to security, the better protected organizations will become. So thank you very much for your time. I see that we don't have any other questions, and I really appreciate being here, and thank you for having me.